And I believe you're not going berserk with specifically this one, but there is another one which is in the works with which you're going completely berserk. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, so that is a project car, a full project car.
Okay.
And this stops where I would personally draw the line as calling it a street car.
Okay, this one.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about that one? That is the RS230.
That is the 230 as a starting point. It's an RS230, but that's been converted to all-wheel drive with parts from other cars that people in India have managed to scrounge up for me from all over.
Can you elaborate a little more on that? Because I think that's going to be interesting to know.
So yeah, that one is in the works. I was able to get an all-wheel drive conversion kit from Venom Performance or Shriram.
Acha.
In
For
Hyderabad.
the Skoda itself, or was it from another vehicle?
So it's essentially from another vehicle because the petrol Octavia never came as an all-wheel drive, not with this engine at least.
I see.
The 1.8 TSI did come. So I mean, there are kits available from these cars, but I'm not using everything from an AWD car. I'm still using a standard RS245 transmission, a DQ381.
Okay.
Right? And I've got the subframe, the Haldex, the prop shaft, the drive shafts, everything got together, courtesy of Shriram.
Okay.
And that's being put together at GT Tuners right now. So stages are just generalized boundaries that the industry has chosen for simplicity of understanding.
Okay.
Right? And so if somebody knows what power level they want to be at, they know exactly how they want to set up their car, then they would go to a tuner and say, look, this is what I want, please give it to me.
Understood.
On the other side, you mentioned people approaching Akshay for a certain use case. Now with his wisdom, for him having tuned and seen that many cars, he would then suggest to the owner, say, I propose to do this, right? Since you're going to track your car, I'm assuming he would typically suggest, okay, don't really go crazy on the power levels, because getting time at a track is also more about how well a car can handle at turns, at what speed it can take a turn, because average speed is what will produce a time.
Exactly.
And
the objective is time.
Exactly.
Correct.
So a very powerful car will also have a tendency to overheat.
Right.
So then you'll have to invest a lot into cooling. So if you've got big power, you need big cooling.
Of course.
Especially if you're going to the track. You can still handle big power on the street and not really do a lot on cooling.
Right.
But if you're going to the track, you need the cooling.
Right.
So for the track, you want to start with something as simple as a stage 1.
Okay.
And you want to work on how the car handles and how sticky the tires are. Tires matter a lot. I mean, this is something that my father actually taught me. He said, you can buy the world's best car, but the only thing touching the ground is still the tires.
Yeah.
And that is the thing people end up cheaping out on. I want the cheapest tires. I want tires that last for 1 lakh kilometers. That's not the right way to approach tires. So finally, if you know what your objective is, you have to be logical about what it needs.
Yeah.
If you want to train up to be a Usain Bolt,
Yeah.
you want a spurt of power and you want it for a shorter amount of time.
Right.
You can think of that as a street use case.
Yeah.
You want to be a marathon runner.
Yeah.
A marathon runner cannot allow their body to overheat.
Correct.
They need to maintain temperature.
Correct.
So if you want to be a Dennis Kimetto,
Yeah.
obviously you can't be pushing as much power as Usain Bolt.
True. And which is, I think, another thing when like you just mentioned about Usain Bolt. So Usain Bolt is a sprinter.
Yes.
And the other gentleman happens to be a marathoner.
Yes.
Marathoners would run on shoes, something like general sneakers or general running shoes.
Yes.
But Usain Bolt will buy spikes that too only on the point of contact, which is touching the ground.
Exactly.
So I think that's precisely what you're saying.
Exactly.
And something very similar I observed and I learned actually myself very recently about brakes and brake pads, that there is a reason. So, I also happen to have a C200.
Okay.
And I observed that, my father's Kia Carnival, उसके तो ब्रेक पैड्स और किसी नॉर्मल जापानीज कार के स्टॉक मारुति सुजुकी और Hyundai कार उनके ब्रेक पैड्स तो 50, 60, 70 हज़ार किलोमीटर चल जाते हैं. बट द थिंग विद दीज जर्मन कार्स एंड यूरोपियन कार्स एंड विद बिगर ब्रेक्स, I think they last only 25,000-30,000 kilometers, and if you're driving hard, even lesser.
Absolutely. I've seen people with an RS burn through a set of pads in one single track day. The pads were finished.
Okay.
It was nearly a situation where the car had to be towed home.
So is it because of the fact that the braking systems are good and they actually end up making the car stop at a much shorter time period?
Not exactly. See, beyond the point, you're just killing your parts.
Okay.
Beyond a certain thermal threshold, you're just burning your brakes up.
Okay.
So they're not doing what they were intended to do.
Okay.
They're just getting killed.
Okay.
So if that is happening, you need to upgrade your brakes. Just like anything, if you want to do something more than what the factory designed it for,
Okay.
there is a limit beyond which you need to change those parts.
Okay.
So pads are actually very important on this front. People end up saying, okay, I want cheap pads, I'll be replacing them quickly. I'd rather say you get the best pads available that have great bite and they last well if you're tracking the car. If you're not tracking the car, you get simple, economical pads that are reliable. I would not say you really get cheap, bad ones, but at least decent, reliable ones. That's my take on it.
And is there like, again, I would like to know from you, because you seem to be having a lot of knowledge about this particular thing, that genuinely, is there an inverse relationship between the brake pad's performance and the time it lasts?
Not exactly. So there, again, it's all material sciences. People have come up with sintered pads. For example, this car is running sintered pads from EBC.
What exactly is a sintered pad?
So this is basically a grit or a powder, typically metal based, that the company has created and then compacted together to make a brake pad. So the philosophy with which they work is that they deposit a layer on the rotor and then they wipe off that layer. Then they deposit a layer, then they wipe off that layer. So they are very frugal. They don't really eat your rotors. They last very long. They have fantastic temperature tolerance. The resins and the bonders used for the brake pads actually are designed for abuse. They're designed for very high temperatures. Right? So I've done 4 track days on these pads and I've not even gone through 50% of them.
Oh, okay. That's quite nice.
So again, these pads are not always available for a stock brake setup. So you have to be very careful in choosing what is the right product for you. What works for me may not work for somebody else. But this is something I've never found a single person who's tried driving my car and said, I'm not happy with the brakes. Whether somebody is driving them on the street or they're tracking the car, everybody sat in the car and said, okay, these brakes are lovely. So which is what brings me to the point of thinking that you should focus on the brakes. And if you are tracking the car, you should upgrade them.
Understood. And I think one thing which I say in people when I'm talking to people like you, like last time I was talking to Kashif and before that Prithvi, Jeremy Clarkson made a wonderful statement saying that it was never driving fast that killed people. It was always trying to stop and not being able to stop.
Absolutely. So I think the way he put it was the stopping suddenly.
I think he was just trying to justify his madness about driving fast.
Well, to be fair, there is a certain point there, you know. People say, okay, I don't drive fast, so I don't need all this. But you don't really know when an emergency is going to pop up. It's not going to announce itself and tell you, look, tomorrow morning, the roads might be a little bit subpar and you might slip and slide a bit. So maybe you want to get better brake pads today. No, that's not going to happen. Right. And in India, we still have a very limited range of conditions we are typically dealing with. Maybe the people in the mountains and those regions are dealing with them. But typically the rest of the country is never dealing with black ice. We are never dealing with roads that have been salted. Right.
Correct.
So we have very limited experience in terms of what is the tractive limit of this vehicle.
Right.
We never drive the vehicles at their limit.
Right.
Very rarely do you do that. So when you get into an emergency, you suddenly realize, okay, I have no control anymore. Now I'm a passenger, I'm not a driver. So you want to be prepared for that. If you're a car enthusiast and you don't have a car that you can control well, I don't think you can call yourself an enthusiast.
Is there a direct relation between upgrading the brakes and the suspension at the same time? Or probably, if I want to rephrase, if you upgrade the brakes, is there any point in upgrading the brakes without upgrading the suspension?
Well, yes, you could. I mean, it'll still stop better. You might have a lot of nosedive and other such things happening. But to a small extent, yes, you can. I mean, an upgrade like mine, a very benign one. I have a 355 millimeter floating rotor in the front. And it is an upgrade that you could put on the stock suspension as well.
Because from what I understood, I mean, this is a general point that genuinely just came across my head, is that if you put stronger brakes, but with a stock suspension, and you end up having more nosedive, so basically what is happening is there is no additional weight coming onto the tire, so you might just end up jamming the wheels sooner and which is not really going to be ending up gripping the road. That's why I actually
Well, for
wanted to
this,
know.
load transfer actually helps. If you actually have load transfer, you have more weight on the front wheels, and that's actually helping you. But the other thing is, you may lose the rear end. So it's a question of balance. The other thing is, brakes don't really stop the car. I mean, this probably sounds counterintuitive, and people would think, okay, this is silly. But if your tires lose traction, you're going to stop slower. If your tires are sliding, you will take longer to stop from the same speed than if you can come to a controlled halt.
Yeah. And you have no control over the direction. No matter where you turn the steering, the car will keep going.
Well, now all cars have ABS, so unless you really disable all the safeties, you still have something.
Correct.
But you don't want to get to that point. So that's why finally braking comes down to tires. Bad tires will just damage everything about the car. It won't work well.
Right.
So
Fair enough.
if you're upgrading brakes, you've already committed that you need by far the best tires you can get. Because it would be a folly to upgrade the brakes without getting the best tires first.
Understood. One fun question, which just this morning I spoke with Prithvi and he told me that this you must ask Bharat.
Okay.
Is that I think you ended up blowing an engine at one point of time. So tell us more about that.
So in that case, I had actually gotten a relatively larger turbocharger, which is specifically a Borg Warner EFR 7163.
Okay.
APR actually came up with a bolt-on fitment kit
Okay.
for that turbocharger to work on our cars.
Okay.
Now, of course, they very clearly said, look, we are not selling this and we don't intend for this to be fitted on a stock engine. You're supposed to rebuild the engine. You're supposed to be using a forged, stronger internals. You need all that to make that turbocharger work. But then we figured, look, let's run this.
Okay.
See how far it goes. And when the engine goes, then we'll figure out getting a forged engine.
Okay.
So on the initial testing, there were a few niggling issues. A pipe had a certain issue and that's why it wasn't making full boost in our tests.
Okay.
The day we sorted this, I'd actually gotten myself to think that I should test the engine as well. I did a leak down test. I put 45 pounds of air into the entire inlet manifold, kept it there for 20 minutes, and I felt very happy with myself. Look, my engine holds up very well. What this did, I didn't realize then, was it somehow damaged the PCV valve, the crankcase ventilation valve.
Okay.
And that damage, the next day when we did the test run with full boost, the surge of pressure in the crankcase went past the PCV valve and the engine ingested its own engine oil and hydrolocked on it. Piston 1 and piston 3 broke. The piston skirts were found inside underneath the crankshaft.
Oh my God.
So that wasn't a very good situation, but testament to VW, it still didn't throw a rod, you know. The rods are fine, the crank is fine.
Okay.
And the engine was still firing. That really surprised me. I didn't realize that the pistons were broken. It was still firing.
So you didn't really blow the engine then?
Oh, well, it didn't explode, so to speak, but the pistons broke. So that's as bad as...
Yeah, so it just...
It's as bad as blowing it. You just have usable parts left after my situation.
It was repairable. It was in repairable condition.
Well, yes, that block is still running.
But tell me one thing. What was it about this Borg Warner turbo that these guys actually told you that, you know what, you might have to change the internals before you use this?
So this build was running a charge pressure of 3.4 bar all the way to 7,300 RPM.
And as against a stock turbo which generates how much pressure?
A stock turbo will typically run from the factory about 2.2 or in very rare circumstances maybe 2.4 bar charge pressure. That's 1.2 to 1.4 bar of boost, give or take. I can give it to you in PSI. That's about 18 PSI, maybe 20 at the maximum.
Okay.
From the factory, whereas we were running 35 PSI.
Okay.
So that's a lot more boost. 35 PSI is typically more air than you pressurize your tires with. And then you're feeding air at that pressure to your engine. So it's a question of digestion. It wasn't well digested.
Right.
In a way, the engine could still handle it mechanically, but the PCV valve said, look, you're not doing this right, and I don't like this.
So then you would have did you end up repairing the engine or you changed the engine block?
So we repaired it. We got parts from Integrated Engineering. We got a full forging kit. So we've got ourselves some I-beam rods.
Okay.
We've got new forged pistons. We've got new rings.
These are all higher spec?
Yes, these are fully forged and they are rated to withstand a lot more. So
fair enough.
In theory, those engines are, I mean, people say that they're good for even 700 horsepower builds. I don't have any intention of trying that.
Yeah.
But I know for sure that they're good for 700 Newton meters because I know 2 or 3 people who are running those engines at 700 Newton meters and there is no problem whatsoever.
Because I think what you're going to be using it for, like let's say even if you have 450 horses under the bonnet, and let's say about 600 or 550 Nm of torque. But what you'll be using it for is that you'll be pushing out that kind of power for a longer period of time. So I think,
Yes.
yeah,
Mechanically,
yeah,
it's strong enough.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like a 400
Exactly.
meter or a 1 kilometer race wherein you're trying to go flat out, so that
Exactly.
it needs to hold up also.
I mean,
Correct.
think of it as a boxing match. The more boost you build, the
Yeah.
more fuel you put, the bigger bang you generate.
True.
The more the piston is being forced down. It's getting something akin to a hammer hit down. It takes about 2 milliseconds
Yeah.
to burn the fuel
Yeah.
in your power stroke when your engine is firing, right? At maybe 7,500 RPM, it's taking about 8 milliseconds for your stroke to complete.
True.
In a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So you're getting close to the edge there.
Yeah.
So that hammer hit has to be strong enough
Yeah.
to send the piston down to give you kinetic power.
Correct.
And at the same time not break the engine.
Absolutely.
So stronger components will help you do that. It's somebody boxing me versus somebody punching Mike Tyson. I mean, Tyson can take it a lot easier.
Yeah.
So it's the same situation. You have the forged engines, the internals are designed for that strain, so they can take it easier. In certain cases, the compression ratio changes as well. So
Right,
instead of the
right,
9.6 is to 1 from the factory, we are running 9.5.
Okay.
There are also kits available at 9.3 from Bartek.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there must be more, but these are the two that I'm using
Got
and
it.
I've got.
So with, I mean, the discussions happening till now, I've clearly observed one thing, that you have a very solid inclination towards tuning cars or making cars faster than what they can actually go, as against buying simply like an M5 or an M6 or an M3. Has that been a very normal thing with you of, wanting to make slower cars go faster and not buying cars that are already going very fast?
So I love mechanicals by nature. And the way I view the world now, I'm not saying that the regulations don't have their place. But when you buy a car, you're essentially driving a government map, as I like to call it.
Okay.
The engine is being asked to give you a certain amount of torque and a certain amount of power.
Right.
It's like telling a sprinter to say, look, you don't want to run past this speed. Just cap yourself here, even if you're comfortable to go harder. That's what we do to the engines when we get them from the factory. They're not running to their physical, convenient, safe thresholds. They don't. Right?
But why do you do it? I mean, why not just buy, like, for example,
Cars are
an
homologated.
M5?
Again, not knocking the regulators in any way. They would go crazy if every car had a different performance level. How would they regulate anything? How would they check anything? So things need to be standardized for them. But in our case, it's a situation of what is this hardware designed to do safely? So turbochargers are typically the only supersonic part of a car. Your average turbocharger will happily survive anywhere between 540 meters per second to 580 meters per second at its tip as speed. Now 580 meters per second is what, 2088 kilometers an hour. So if you could theoretically get the turbo compressor wheel out while it's at full speed and put it on the ground, in theory, it would be moving at 2088 kilometers an hour.
Okay.
And most turbochargers are safe to that point. So in an ideal world, you would limit the maximum boost that you run in an engine.
Right.
And you would limit the maximum speed you run your turbocharger. And then you let the hardware do what it does. That, according to me, is the ideal way to unleash an engine. It runs to its perfectly safe, defined limits and gives you whatever it can given your circumstances. If it's hot, you'll have a little bit less power.
Understood.
If it's colder, the air is denser, you'll have a little bit more power.
Okay. No, that I got. So what I was actually intending to ask is there a kick that you get out of making these cars go faster than they actually can instead of buying a normal fast car?
Well, I think I do it even to a fast car. So, because I think it's just like an unlock of what the hardware is already designed to do. So I don't view it as tampering with the car. I see it as unlocking its natural inherent potential.
Because I've spoken to many people, and there are a lot of people who, like, for instance, I just mentioned Prithvi and Kashif and many other people. They just cannot drive stock cars. They just feel restricted. Even if you give them like a 530 petrol, they'll be like, yaar, isme to bahut potential hai. Unko, because they know for a fact that these engines from factory are running at probably 30 or 40% of their maximum ability.
Okay, so I won't really lie about it. I think there is that itch and that question to know what can it actually do.
I guess that's...
I think it's there somewhere. I will not completely outright say that it's not there.
Right.
the other two you mentioned, Prithvi ji and Kashiv ji, these guys are at a different level. So I don't think I would do as much as those guys. But
Oh, please don't
Yeah.
be modest.
no, so I mean, so look at what they are driving, right? Prithvi Ray is driving literally an Olin suspension on the street.
Yeah.
I'm driving a street suspension. I'm not driving something fancy. I mean, my mother could drive this car and she would not feel that it's different or it's less comfortable. It feels like a normal car. I could give it to a valet and he would have no idea that it is a 400 horsepower car.
Till he steps on the gas.
Oh, well, I would assume that he wouldn't do that. So, to be fair to myself, I wouldn't want the valet to be doing that.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.